Well, today on the program, we shall be speaking to a guest all the way from Dubai, and that is the CEO for EFG Hermes Frontier, Mr. Ali Khalpey, who will be talking to us about the outlook for Africa and how the company is performing in light of COVID-19. But before we dive into this discussion, let's take a look at his profile.
Ali Khalpey joined the EFG Hermes team in 2017 as CEO of Frontier Markets and brings over 20 years of experience in financial services, combining work in investment banking, equity sales, and asset management. In 2013, he co-founded Exotics Africa in London and as CEO built the leading Frontier Markets investment bank with a presence in Nigeria and Kenya. Since joining EFG Hermes in 2017, he has rapidly expanded the firm's global footprint and established businesses in Pakistan, Kenya, Bangladesh, UK, and more recently Nigeria. Ali was educated at Winchester College, England, and graduated with a Bachelor of Science Honours First Class in Economics from the London School of Economics.
Thank you so much for making time for us, Ali. Hope you've been keeping safe. A lot happening in the stock markets across Africa, across the globe. Let's just begin by you walking us through what you do as EFG Hermes.
As a group, we're present across frontier and emerging markets. The history of the group has evolved out of Egypt over 40 years ago. We've expanded into the Middle East over the last 30 years. And the last 4 years has really seen a significant expansion into African and Asian markets. Actually, our first new entry point was actually Kenya in 2017, where we have a business, a brokering business on the ground in Nairobi with 15 people. We've expanded that into Pakistan, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Nigeria. And we basically offer a full service investment banking service to institutional investors, both on the ground in home countries as well as foreign investors.
All right, quite an interesting time to be in the space. And just describe for us, since COVID struck, how has business been?
I think the initial shock of going into lockdown worldwide was obviously quite challenging. I think the organization adapted very quickly to working from home with pretty much our entire global workforce, which measures over 3,000 people working from home since the middle of March. And I think we were quite progressive in taking that call early on. Which fortunately the infrastructure we have as a firm has grown fast over the last 10 years enabled us to be on the ball pretty much straight off the bat. In terms of market volumes, the reality is the clients left trade. So the broking business has actually held up pretty well. I'd say 10 and 15% decline in volumes. Our market shares have gone up in that period given the concentration of liquidity with large players like ourselves across all of our markets, whether it be in Nigeria or Kenya or Pakistan or Bangladesh. So we've seen an increased market share for the firm. The advisory business has clearly slowed down. We've got a number of transaction advisory mandates across Africa. 3 of those are actually in Ethiopia, where the due diligence is just not possible when you're in lockdown.
All right. Quite an illustrious run you guys have had. And Ali, congratulations, of course. I saw you actually ranked first and second for the 3rd year in a row in Frontier and Middle East and North Africa. This was research that was actually done by the Institutional Investors Poll of 2020, which really means a vote of confidence for you. What do you have to say about this?
Well, I think the first thing to say is thank you to all of our clients and supporters who really they're the ones who vote for these surveys, and it's a pretty comprehensive vote done by external institutional investor. To do it 3 years in a row, I think is quite an achievement. We embarked upon this project for Frontier Markets 4 years ago, and I think the main thing is consistency pays dividends, and I think we've been consistent as a firm, consistent as a team. And obviously, hats off to our research team for who this work belongs. We've had a phenomenal success, and I think EFG has a history of being a long-term investor in these markets. So, I think if you look at all the markets that we operate in across the Middle East, whether it's Saudi or Bahrain or the UAE, obviously Egypt, through tough times, through thick and thin, EFG has always been there.
All right. And Ali, when you look at frontier markets, it has been a very interesting curve. We've been seeing a lot of activity when it comes to inflows compared to the developed markets. From where you sit, what has been driving growth in frontier markets, and what do you see in your crystal ball?
I think if you look at the history of frontier markets the last 8 years, and I've been focusing on Africa for the last 20 and frontier for the last 8 to 10 years. Clearly there was a desire to invest into nascent markets that weren't easy to invest in. And I think the ease of investing has changed dramatically. So I think, that has certainly led to flows. I mean, to go back 8-9 years ago, to get a custody account in Nigeria was almost impossible. Today, through the use of block custodians, but also through the use of EFG's balance sheet, we're able to facilitate investors getting into these new markets. So I think that's been a game changer, which has led to a lot of interest and flow activity into these markets. So we saw a very big push into frontier between 2010 and 2014, 2015. We then obviously had the mini financial crisis, collapse of the EM in 15, 16, and we saw some outflows. More recently, I think just given what central banks are doing globally and what the Fed is doing, it becomes very difficult to make the case, the short-term case for frontier markets. Clearly, I think there are two asset classes right now which are doing incredibly well. One is obviously technology, another one is fintech.
All right. And Ali, let's take this conversation forward now. When you look at also the global volatility has actually affected valuations, and this, for a large extent, has also dampened the investor appetite. And do we see things changing, and what will it take for us to see investor participation going back to the highs we used to register a couple of months before COVID struck?
So I think the first thing is, when we look at liquidity, there are different pools of liquidity. So I think, first of all, domestic liquidity. And obviously domestic liquidity is now returning. And I think, central banks across Africa and across Asia are following the lead of the Fed, and obviously T-bill rates are declining, and that obviously makes the equity case a lot more interesting and compelling across all of our markets. And certainly we started to see that. I think Pakistan has been the forefront of that transformational change, where we've had a very aggressive central bank policy of rate cuts. We've now got rates around 8% in Pakistan, and that has led to a flurry of activity in the market. So, we've seen the Pakistan market up 40% since the lows of March this year. So I think that's domestic liquidity plays a key role.
All right, Ali, you sit at a very vantage point. Just explain to us, where do you see Kenya? Are we a key country in terms of the market, and where are the opportunities from the investors?
Well, for us, for EFG, Kenya is extremely important. As I said to you at the start, this was our first market that we entered into. We've built the business over 3.5 years. We continue to be very supportive of our business. I think year to date, we're the largest stockbroker now in Kenya, ahead of all of our peers. And, I think Kenya is important to different types of investors. So in a frontier context, it's extremely important. I think Kenya has definitely been a big beneficiary of Nigeria's demise. And I think, the policies that the Kenyan government has instituted has been extremely positive. Your central bank governors has been very transparent, very communicative. And I think, it's been a pleasure to see actually Kenya evolve. And I've been looking at Kenya for over 10 years. So I think Kenya is evolving itself out of being a pure Kenyan story to being more of a regional story. And I think, certainly you've got the champions there, Equity Bank, KCB, not to mention Safaricom, East African breweries. I think the next phase for growth in Kenya is really going to be how Kenya comes out of this COVID scenario. I think we'll be quite fortunate to see that in sub-Saharan Africa, the impact of COVID has been less significant than other parts of the world that we've seen, especially if you look at the numbers and the casualty rates.
All right. And Ali, just before I let you go, there's been a very interesting trend we've seen also during this COVID time. This has been, gold prices have been on the upside. And what do you read in this?
I think gold is in a perfect storm. I think anyone who's followed gold for the last 20 years, this has probably been the best perfect storm for them. You've got central banks, injecting massive amount of liquidity. There's no yield on government assets, which means the cost of holding gold, the opportunity cost of holding gold is very low. So instead of holding $100,000 of treasuries, I buy $100,000 of gold. The opportunity cost of holding gold is minimal because I'm not getting much of a yield on my treasuries. I think the prospect of obviously higher inflation in the future, given that we've pumped so much liquidity into the system, eventually inflation expectations are going to rise, and that is obviously propelling gold to new highs as people look for a potential store of value going forward.
All right. And your parting shot, Ali, when it comes to what do you have in store for investors as EFG Hermes, clearly seeing a lot of interest within East Africa and, of course, Central Africa?
I think, we've obviously got a number of really high quality companies that operate in these markets. And I think, when we talk about investors, we don't just deal with institutional investors, we deal with a lot of private equity investors. And I think, both groups of investors see the growth trends and the opportunities that are evolving out of East and Central Africa. Specifically, I think, I mentioned Ethiopia a few times. This is a market which has been closed to investors for as long as everyone can remember. There obviously been some select private equity transactions that have taken place, but clearly the new government, and hopefully the election goes smoothly and Abiy stays in power to continue the reform policy that he's implemented over the last few years. I think we see a huge opportunity for a 100 million people market, whether it's the telecom sector or the banking sector or the brewing sector or the financial technology sector. These are all massively underinvested sectors in Ethiopia. I think Kenyan companies will be at the forefront in that charge. So we know everybody is bidding for telecom licenses. We know that the banks want to continue to expand into that part of the world.
All right. Ali, what keeps you awake at night in light of what's happening across the world?
The most pressing thing on my mind recently is the safety of our employees. Clearly we run a very diverse number of platforms ranging from Nigeria through to Kenya, through to Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Vietnam. I think, the COVID has obviously impacted each of these markets differently. Bangladesh, Pakistan have obviously been extremely hard hit, as is our own home country in Egypt. And that has really been the forefront where the safety of our employees and their families has been of a key concern. We've had a number of cases within our various teams across various markets. Thankfully, all of our team members are safe, but also for our children who are growing up in a very unusual and uncertain time. Homeschooling, working from home, lack of homeschooling, lack of social interaction. These are key challenges for society, and I think for our employees, especially in some of the more difficult places like Bangladesh and Pakistan, those keep us worried. Same thing with Nigeria. It's a very tough place, and I think we have to hope that this passes soon and we can all return back to normal life and continue to focus on the positives in the world.
All right. Thank you so much, Ali Khalpey, for speaking to us here at the Trading Bell.
This is KTN News.